What is legato? This is finger legato, meaning you connect, you overlap, you defeat decay of each of the notes to create an illusion, and hopefully more than that, of singing an aria or a vocalise since there are no lyrics. I must say that originally the idea that a percussive instrument would sing was against the odds. But the fact is that all the perfectioning of the instrument for centuries before today brought to a length of sound before decay, and this prior to using the right foot pedal, is difficult to define if it's more valuable to play legato without the pedal. I believe honestly that it depends of the acoustics, but mostly it depends of your conception of what is a legato. Because it's by essence melodic. As soon as you put the right foot pedal, you lift all the dampers. Therefore, you have resonances of all the soundboard strings that are free to resonate by sympathy, which is beautiful. And if you combine it to an accompaniment, which by essence is harmonic, and the melodic line by essence is therefore melodic, having a one right foot pedal lifting all the dampers for both elements, you don't have two keyboards with separate pedal holding or setting, then you start accepting in your concept of sound that it will blur and blend. And of course now here it's a room. If you play in a hall, there is a natural resonance, and then you can interact with the resonance, and therefore less blur with pedal, which is more tempting in more drier acoustic spaces where you want to create a sense of vibrato almost, as you would do in a voice or a wind or a voice or string instrument, where the sound starts and then spawns into a reverberation that comes from the resonance as well as from the vibrato that holds it to the next note. If it's a tension release or a build-up of a passing tone to go further in the phrase before you reach the climax and eventually release or delay the release. In other words, it depends of what you're telling in your storytelling or how you imagine structuring the phrase direction arching. A singer has to count where they're going to breathe according to the speed in which they exhale. wind players too, string instrument players because of the bow length. Pianists don't have to, so they almost can play in an asphyxiated way. It's unnatural, but very practical when you have to manage a lot of elements. So by essence, the piano is not a melodic instrument only, far from there. It's really a harmonic instrument, or arpeggiated, or polyphonic. So you feel like you're dividing your attention to several voices towards which you can highlight few or bring others less, but nevertheless, it's an illusion that the decay won't overtake, depending how slow you play, the melodic line. If you do, and then it's dead. So you cannot either make an artificial ornament that could be imitation of a tremolo to prolong the legato to the next note, because it sounds awkward, it sounds pointillistic, even with pedal. With or without that hairpin which I added to give the illusion that we can even exponentially expand the sound. I find that legato is very often treated as patchwork for pianists because they have to deal with so many elements, as I said earlier, that are far from the melodic line alone, so they basically englobe it in the pedal. So yes, it becomes blurry or harmonic, regardless, even if it's harmonic. But the quality of the connection of the sound, I think, also comes from the very initial articulation of each note in the legato, which is that you play the finger not from above the key, but on the key. So if I play above the key, you hear, and then if not, I find it very striking when you work with instruments like bowed instruments or with singers, then you try to match them in whatever you're given to play by the composers, who most of the time in chamber music with piano were not string players. Paganini's great violinist, didn't write a lot of equal piano, let's say, and string works, or even Joachim, who wrote these: Brahms, Schumann, Beethoven, Fauré, Saint-Saëns, who are organists, symphonists, quartetists, composers, who thought the piano as the orchestral reduction, and the other instruments, the truly melodic instruments, single voice instruments, mostly, even if they can play double stop for the strings, to be the singing part. And so therefore, I find that mesmerizing to find this refined quality of the legato. Now, of course, when you connect legato to mezzo piano, mezzo pianissimo, or pianissimo, yes, you have to keep your finger on the key. And once you play it on the key, you feel like the sound directly speaks with a vowel without a consonant. Instead of saying ta 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 ta, you say ta ha ha ha. Now the problem comes when the legato is connected not to piano or whichever level of under piano, mezzo pianissimo or mezzo forte, and you play legato forte. Well, it depends of the resonance speed, because acoustically, if you play slow, then the decay shows, and each note becomes a spike. If you play fast, and without pedal, you have still the resonance, you have the connection, and you don't have the decay. But when the tempo is moderato or andante or anything spreading, and I assume everybody has their own recipe for legato. Overlapping, just connecting, or almost air legato, where you hear the consonants and here you don't. And when you're a listener, you start appreciating if they blur, if they connect, if they overlap, if you make an arch with a hairpin, or an arch with a dropping sound, or an arch with sustaining sound. And so you enter in this kind of general problem about how to deal with it, not separately, but part of its accompaniment. Most of the accompaniments of the piano are arpeggiated in order to spread the resonance, though sometimes it's just patched chords. Or but you can alternate the pedal of the right foot with the harmonization and separate the melodic connection to leave it by the finger if you're obliged, because the hand is already taken in the same right hand with chords and the melodic line, to make a lot of substitutions, which is a difficult thing about the balance of the palm, so that you don't slip, because you put pressure on weak fingers like 4 and 5, single tendon connection. All pianists know that, but it takes a lot of power to sustain the palm support of the articulation through the knuckles for the fingers tip that deeply go in the keys from inside the keys to avoid banging. And not. But if it's dynamically soft, and you feel like it's not soft enough, you also have the left pedal, which very often teachers disagree with. Because honestly, it is a great tool. It allows you to go for a stark contrast when you go, and then, but if you do, of course that I played louder, to be honest. But to be really, I think if you go to pianissimo with una corda, you go beyond pianissimo. It's almost muffled, like I speak to you. Now, some pianos, depending of the way they are fine-tuned, voiced and all, have lesser impact with the unicorda than others. This one particularly darkens the sound. That's the natural, and this is with the left foot. If you add the right foot, you get this halo resonance with muffled sound, but you erase the vibration that resonates naturally or emanates naturally from each of the sounds. And I believe a lot in shaping the phrasing, not necessarily only with hairpin, but a certain shape of the direction that you want to emotionally convey the drive, either because of a harmonic progression, either because of the melodic interval gesture, when you have step motion, or a leap. Of course, the leap is more obvious in singing, because you go from one note to the other, or you glide to it. And on the piano, you cannot do, because you cannot do glissando or sliding, other than overlapping by holding the first note longer. So you give the illusion that you don't just state the notes, but that you connect. And I think that pianists are so overwhelmed by the difficulty of managing all the elements on the score, and they have to be managed, that the individual quality of the timbre, of the sound, of the subtle innuendo that a finger legato suggests in the loneliness of the line compared to the harmonization, compared to if you put it all in the pedal. But as you heard, most people do that because it's more practical, less risk-taking to separate the elements or to try to create a three-dimensional texture where you have this. And this separated like an oboe solo in orchestra, for instance, where there's no pedal, obviously. But in the piano, if you put the right foot pedal for both, so what happens when you take off the pedal in order to create the single note connection versus the agglomeration is that you have to finger pedal by holding with your fingers what is not written in the notation in order, because if you don't, then you have a gap in the harmonic rooting accompaniment. So in order not to deplete the accompaniment and nor to blur the melody, in order to give that illusion that you have several independent layers of dynamics, but also of timbres and coloristic effects. One is single note, one is conglomeration of notes. You can say that all this is aesthetic choices that are unrelated to practical applications. It's just sound for sound, with or without pedal, with or without left pedal, with or without blurred arpeggiation in the melody, if there were chords or any other patterns of accompaniment, where then it all blends and becomes one. With the example I gave you is that I make it up. So I choose which kind of texture combination I want to display. But when I play the written piece by some other composer, and mostly of them dead before our births, we're not given that option. We have to deal with how they organized all that. And so some can say, yeah, but they had longer fingers, or no, but their keys were less wide. Yes, but their pedal didn't hold as much, so it was less blurry. Or they didn't play so slow tempi because they anyway had instruments that didn't have today's technique of modern pianos that enhances length and power. Yes, and all this can be put together because I've often been thinking about that. Is a fact of matter. Also the pitch, because we had 440, and the pianos from before were tuned lower, so they had less resonance in power of tension. It was more relaxed sound. Like if I play compared to this semitone difference, not only is pitch tiny bit higher, of course, it also, because it's higher, you have the illusion or the understanding or the emotional reception that this is a little bit more tense. So how do composers choose the tonalities for piano? Well, that is a good question. We cannot ask from the dead ones, and they didn't explain because they didn't have to. They just did choose. Being a chromatic instrument, unlike a B-flat trumpet or F horn or an E-flat clarinet, which are tuned for specific keys. Of course, they play in every key, but let's say the wind instruments prefer to be in flat keys, meaning B flat, E flat, A flat, F major. And that's how most of their concerti pieces are composed in, because it fits their instrument. And so it's one option for the choice of the tonality, the colorization of the statement. Another is for the string players whose strings, for the violin or for the viola, or for the cello, or for the double bass, are basically open tones, meaning no sharps, no flats. So that's why most of the string music is written in G major, C major, A major, E major, or sharp keys in the key signature compared to the flat keys in key signature for the winds. Now the piano is a hybrid instrument. It can play in every key, since the well-tempered tuning of Silbermann for Bach, who composed the famous 24 twice 48 prelude fugues for each major and minor key. So why does a composer choose a tonality? And of course, we know by the fact that the instrument's construction, tension of the strings didn't allow the same tension as today, or didn't have to have it. There were straight strung gut strings. Today they are crossed strings with the steel, and of course the projection is stronger. So therefore, especially if you play with orchestra, a piano can overpower an orchestra, the power of one, army of one, versus the many. But the many have different timbres, and they don't always play separately, sometimes together and many times by groups. And the piano is not an entity either. It has also these elements of the ranges, which, except the organ, I think no other instrument matches in amount of span. Well, nevertheless, the highest notes decay so faster than the lowest, which keep on going. So to say that the extreme octave are usable for melodic expression, it would be not really true compared to or. But that again is the composer's choice. When they compose for piano, they imagine opera or aria or symphony or quartet. Or an aria. Or a symphonic. That versatility of the piano allows for, of course, the usage of the pedal when you cannot hold all the 88 keys with your 10 fingers. But the finger legato is when you choose to hold certain things in order to liberate the resonance of the melodic line. That's why I believe that true legato is finger legato, not foot manufactured. Because you hear the dampers going whoosh, 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 whoosh. Well, you hear it if the microphone is close to them, not in the hall, but nevertheless. And I was saying, yeah, it's true, I'm playing what I want to display. If I play for you, I'm singing legato of a piece like the Fourth Ballade by Chopin. Now I don't have the choice. I have to play chords and a bass note. So the bass is F and the chords are tonic and 7th degree. And then the melodic line has a leap of 4th and ends unfinished on a ascending minor 3rd. So if I put the right foot pedal for both, then you hear effectively combined. If I separate in layers the right hand legato without pedal and the left hand pedal, because I cannot hold the bass line with the left hand because I don't have two left hands, and the chords, or then I lose the bass to play the harmony, in which case I'll hear. So I'm gonna lose my bass and I will gain clarity. But then if I hold the bass in the pedal for these 2 beats with the chords, then that connects the melody not as a leap of a 4th, but as a 4th, not a ascending 4th or descending 4th, an ascending 3rd. So the trick is to play the pedal in between, or halfway, or as I like to think, pumping or vibrato pedal. There's one thing Chopin does a lot in his singing imitation on the piano, is the repeated notes. It would have been very much natural for the instrument to do. For the connection of the sounds. Repeated notes on the piano, being a percussive instrument, becomes syllable, syllable, ta, 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 ta. And not ha, 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 ha. That's why I lift halfway up, and before the resonance is finished, I replay. I redrop fast from inside. That is the beginning of the Waldstein Sonata by Beethoven. I don't use pedal. Only finger connection. If not, it's staccato. And in this case, it's not a melodic line, though you could think of it, that there is a hint through the pointillistic dots of the eighth notes, that they create election of notes that goes, you elect to go to the dominant. If it's written as it is, 4 parts, it could be string quartet. If string quartet plays it, you'll never hear ta 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 ta, you'll hear ta ha 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 ha. Okay, this is different from this, because Chopin's repeated note is longer value. And if you don't do what I just did, you'll hear ta 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 ta, and mine is ta ha ha. Most pianists don't like to use this subtlety to replay within leaving the key before it's fully up, because they're afraid, and understandably so, that on many actions of instruments which have uneven notes actions, some note might not repeat and some might accent uncontrollably. So not to take risks, they play separate and then they put pedal. I call the foot pedal. But you hear the difference of intimacy. Oh, I would like to tell you how much. It's because in voice, when you have singing voice, you have lyrics. The lyrics on the repeated note don't sound repeated because you follow the storytelling of the lyrics. I would like to dance with you. And not I would like to dance you. But Chopin imitates the change of syllables of an aria from bel canto arias of his time, operas. With a narrative story about which is suppressing, which is adding, which is reaching, which is the most of the is. Now you can choose not to do the hairpin and just do. In any case, it's a prolongation, because if you hold it, if he held it and made us hold it, then decaying enough, you have to hear da da dee da da. It comes unnatural because the tension release of the music is to carry from the dominant to the tonic tension release. But because of the decay, and we cannot sustain it, or with a trill, but we don't have to do that since it's not indicated. And obviously he didn't want it. That means that there is a little bit of make-believe. How do you avoid the decay and avoid the articulation disgraceful accent because of the decay that you don't take in account. Some would say that the accompaniment acts as a vibrato that gives a resonance enhancement to the decaying held note. I think it's more make-believe than real, but factually, you don't play just a melody in Chopin and just a bass line, nor just chords. You play all together. And if you want to play it more subtly, it's less by the note and more connected resonance. Of course, it's a question of taste, of tempo. If you play by essence, you have less decay. But because you have less decay, you have a faster tempo, which makes the mood a little more hectic than calm. So who chooses the tempo? And the composer chose the tonality, in this case F minor and not. You can argue that it sounded even more relaxed in F minor, and perhaps today it sounds for him too tense up. On the old 33 RPM LP players, some of them had the pitch control adjustment where you can speed the 33 point whatever RPM, speed details of the post decimal, in order to make sure that according to your electricity current in your house, you adjust so that you don't hear it half step higher or half step lower than the pitch on which it was recorded when it was tuned, wherever it was tuned. And not all tuners tune at the same height. So those things don't exist today because the music comes pre-packaged and you don't have the choice to modulate the pitch with the downloads, or rather the streaming, let less on the compact disc before either. And that comes back to the idea of the color. Does a tonality create a mood through a color? We can call it perhaps more about atmosphere than color. And why did Chopin write the first ballade in G minor? It's a good point, huh? I would like to know too. It's not, which is probably how it sounded then to us, but to them that was G minor perhaps. And but he could have been dramatically choosing a further tonality for symbolic reasons perhaps, or for the way the intervals, while the same, resonate differently at the different pitches. Of course, the choice of the range also changes a lot of the mood, because then the sound of the piano has more length of sound if you do, or if you're doing. Inevitably sounds like a music box, and here is a basso from an opera, but it's in the middle. Unlike the melodic line of the fourth ballade, where the bass and the chords are on the beats, here in the first ballade, he delays the harmonization. So you always hear the melody alone. It would have been like if it were. We can argue a lot about the togetherness of the two hands in Chopin because of recordings we have, especially of Alfred Cortot, who was a great propagander of the expression of the melodic line in Chopin to be highlighted by not aligning it with the bass notes. Even if tinily, well, sometimes not as tinily, but most of the time. That allows to not hear. And in fact, the problem is, what do we hear? Do we have as listener a layered hearing, or do we have a combined hearing? In an orchestra, do we isolate a part, or can we not, or should we even? Or is it all about how it blends? And with the pedal, it blends on the piano, the harmony, the melody, and the bass. And Chopin very often uses almost two hands, as I said earlier, for the left hand. This way I can finger hold the bass and finger connect the chords without lifting all the 88 dampers to resonate. So wah wah wah, but just focused on that resonance, only of the notes that you play. And then you sing, I would like to dance with you today. I have a silly lyrics to sing Chopin. Oh God, I made a real fun of myself. Now the fact is that you have to sing it. So of course you can use the middle pedal on modern pianos, which of course he didn't have, to hold the bass and clearly hold the melody clean from blurriness, and then hold these by the finger and do. And that is something that some pianists were considering, and I must say, me too. Except that ultimately when you hear it, while it's satisfactory intellectually, hey, finally, I can have this layered separation of the elements instead of blurring them all together in one pedal, because I can hold the fingers separately in those stretches that are written for it. Of course, they didn't have it, so therefore they blurred. Would it be? Or perhaps they played drier. Or perhaps, we don't know, in fact. I would like to know how they played it. Did they delay the bass? Did they play together? Today, people are very strict about playing the notes as if the notation is the intent, but the intent is through the notation by any composer. And so we have room for, some composers, pianists like Liszt or Rachmaninoff did a lot of, not a lot, but took freedoms with the text. But today, composers being not pianists for most of them, and pianists not composing for most of them, then there is just the score to recite and nothing to rethink. And therefore, the middle pedal that gives a great option to keep these layers from blurring is not used because it didn't exist. And of course, for contemporary music, you would say that's logical since it's a modern tool and the instruments have it. Most pianists don't use it. I composed when I was 18 a piano sonata, and I held this in the first note, and then I had staccato articulation arpeggios before I played chords. And if not, it would be all blurred. But it was conceived for such instrument with the middle pedal, not only in mind or as an option, but as an obligation. Without it is not playable. But fitting that to music of the past can appear unnatural, because after all, the composers of the past for piano composed things as if they had 8 hands, holding separately different levels of holdings for the melodic, the contrapoint, the secondary voice, there's so many elements of polyphony inside. It's not just a melody and accompaniment, it's secondary voices, is the wave of the arpeggio, is the blunt energy of the chord, and then all these elements that I spoke about in terms of decay, tempo, and articulation. So when I go back to the very thought of what is a legato, I would say it's an imagination of imitating lyrics in a song or an aria, or perhaps even vocalese only, of a voice, without the vibrato, without the crescendo holding a note, but with the illusion that the tip of the resonance before the next decay, you take it in account. So if you have a very long note to hold, then the next note has to be where the decay led it. Because if you hold it and then it decays, and you play equally articulated projection as the original note, then you have a peak, a spike. But if you take it in account, if you want true singing in terms of lyricism, you don't spike the note unless it's the end of the phrase and you start the next. But within the phrase, you don't want to say in the imaginary words an accent on a syllable that doesn't need it. I would like to tell you. All this sounds very theoretical. I realize that by displaying different aspects of how to handle a legato, how to determine a legato, how to prepare to express a legato according to the textures in which it's embedded. Yes, you have to make concessions. When you cannot hold everything and you cannot use the middle pedal and it's stretched, then you have to put the pedal, which will englobe some of the melodic gestures of the intervals of a sixth, of a fifth, compared to a step motion. So you make a concession to your ideal, or then you play four hands or something. Of course not, if it's not written for it. It's okay. My problem often is that I find that it allows then to treat everything for a pedal legato, even where with substitution and pulsing pedal, you could subtly refine the innuendos of the resonances so that they don't overlap or blur. A subtle combination between avoiding dryness according to the acoustics and blurring according to the texture. I guess it's a signature of a player, just like the timbre of the voice of a singer is unique to their morphology. Of course, we play industrial instruments that are not unique like the violins. or the oboes, handmade. Even if they sound like an oboe, they have differences between them, and same between violins. The pianos are produced so industrially that even if they're handmade, a lot of it is so standardized that I still find quite almost magic that a performer plays on an instrument and it sounds legato singing, another plays and it sounds non-legato blurred singing. Now the question is, ultimately, the listener, informed or not, if it's a professional, or just wanting to be told the story, do they make the real difference of valuing the one versus the other? I really don't know. I think it's an acquired taste that you bring them by playing the way you do. And then perhaps they start discerning the difference and missing what they didn't know they were missing before, that it could be layered and not blurred. And that blurred is beautiful, but not necessarily the only way. So of course, if they're only used to one way, because people generally play for practical reasons that way, then they'll find that your playing is, let's say, dry, or doesn't sound like everybody else, or for the sake of it or something. Then that's a judgmental situation. But aesthetically speaking, if you were given the choice, it would be nice to be able to appreciate how the different touch of the piano, literally touch, through the industrial instrument's action, individually shapes the phrasing of the melodic legato within the context of the general texture. Fascinating, no? I am fascinated how many different people play different legato.